What's up, guys? It's MB Boxing, and today I'm finally going to be releasing my prediction for arguably the biggest fight in boxing today, Errol Spence Jr. versus Terence Crawford. And this fight is going to be a 12-rounder in the welterweight division for the undisputed WBC, WBA, WBO, and IBF welterweight championship of the world. And this fight is going to be Saturday, July 29th, from the T-Mobile Arena in Las Vegas, Nevada. And this fight is going to be broadcasted on Showtime pay-per-view. And to get both fighters' resumes, Errol Spence Jr., fighting out of the United States, holds an unbeaten record of 28-0, with 21 wins coming by way of knockout. He's the current three-belt welterweight unified champion. He holds the WBC, WBA, and IBF welterweight world titles, respectively. And he's currently not ranked by BoxRec since he hasn't fought in over a year. However, he's universally recognized as either the number one or number two guy in the welterweight division. But to list some of his best victories, he has defeated Kell Brook by knockout to become an IBF world champion. He has defeated Mikey Garcia by dominant unanimous decision. He's also defeated Sean Porter in an absolute war by split decision. He's defeated Danny Garcia by unanimous decision. And in his last fight, he defeated Yordenis Ugas by TKO to become a three-belt world champion. But to get his opponent's resume, Terence Crawford, fighting out of the United States as well, holds an unbeaten record as well at 39-0 with 30 knockouts. To list some of Crawford's accolades throughout his career, he's definitely had a lot more rounds and a lot more experience than Spence. So he's also the former WBO lightweight world champion. He's also the former undisputed super lightweight world champion, holding the WBC, WBA, WBO, and IBF world titles at 140. And he's also the current WBO welterweight champion of the world. But to list some of his best victories throughout his entire career, most of his wins, you'll notice, have come in other weight classes. At welterweight, he really just hasn't had some of these good wins, unlike Errol Spence, obviously, whose resume is all in the welterweight division. But for Terence Crawford, his best wins range from a unanimous decision victory over Ricky Burns, which was at lightweight. He got a TKO win over Eureka Gamboa, which was also at lightweight. He defeated Victor Postal by unanimous decision at super lightweight. He knocked out Julius Ndongo early, and that was also at super lightweight for the undisputed crown. He got a TKO win over Kell Brook in 2020, which was obviously many years after Kell Brook fought Errol Spence Jr., but it's still definitely one of Crawford's best wins. He won by TKO early in the fight, whereas Spence won late in the fight. And his best win, probably on his resume, was a KO win over Sean Porter. And I believe that was, I think, early in 2022, if I'm not wrong. Maybe I'm wrong with the date, but I'm pretty sure it was early in 2022 or late in 2021. It might have been late in 2021, but yeah, he got a stoppage win over Sean Porter. Errol Spence Jr. wasn't able to stop Porter, but the fight was fought completely differently. Errol Spence Jr. went to war with Porter, whereas Crawford was fighting much smarter, much more technical, as opposed to Spence. But both were pretty solid fights, and both were very, very close. Sean Porter was arguably up against Terence Crawford when he got stopped. And in Spence's fight against Crawford, in Spence's fight against Porter, Porter definitely could have won that. It was really, really close in my opinion, and the judges had it close as well. So in my opinion, this fight is really one of the best fights that could be made in boxing. As I said earlier, it's in the Glamour division, 147. I know we also had a very big fight between Iowa Inoue and Stephen Fulton just a few days ago, but I mean, this fight, I think, just tops it. It's in Las Vegas. It's broadcasted on pay-per-view. It's going to be it's on Saturday night. I mean, it's going to get so many eyes on it. It's really between two undefeated world champions. It's going to be a really, really good fight. I'm excited for it. I'm expecting a really, really close fight. I'm not really expecting anything that's going to be one-sided beatdown, just like we saw the other day. But I think that it's going to be really, really close either way. I can't really see either of these guys dominating one another. And if they do, I mean, props to the guy who does. So, I mean, throughout the past few years, I don't know if you've seen me on other boxing YouTube channels like specifically Mighty Max Boxing. I believe I was on one of his streams, and I was talking about how I think we were talking about some fantasy fights, and I was picking Spence to beat Crawford, and that was a few years ago as well. Might have been a year and a half ago. And all that time, I was just thinking Spence will always beat Crawford. That's what I was under the impression in my mind. I was always thinking that Spence would beat Crawford. I was just not convinced with Crawford's resume. But now, obviously, as I'm getting older, watching more of Crawford's fights, analyzing his game plan, I really think this fight's going to be so close. And I was really debating picking Crawford in this one. I mean, I really think it's close, but I'm just going to be edging it to Errol Spence Jr., and I think he's just going to get the job done, but I think it's going to be really close. Either man, if I would have picked either one, I would have picked a split decision. In the end, I'm picking a split decision win for Errol Spence Jr., but I really think this is going to be a really close fight, and I mean, I'm definitely excited for it. But just to break this fight down round by round, I think the earlier rounds, like the first 4 rounds, are going to be pretty successful for Errol Spence Jr., and he's going to get some decent rounds in there, some decent points on the judges' scorecards. I think Errol Spence Jr. has very good body work. He's also got a great chin on him. Hasn't really been hurt in his career. Obviously, he fought years ago where he got caught with one nice shot. I can't remember the guy's name he fought. It might have been against Bundu. Might have not been. But he got caught with a very good shot, got wobbled. But he's never been down, never really been hurt besides that moment. Against Dennis Ugas, there was that weird moment where he dropped his mouthpiece and got caught with a shot. He could have been hurt there as well, but he really hasn't shown anything with his chin and problems like that. But I think in the earlier rounds of this fight, Spence is going to be digging to the body of Crawford, really just trying to get in there and rough him up, because I don't really think Spence is going to be taking it slow. I think he's going to go out from the gate, start pretty fast, and I think he's going to win 3 of the first 4 rounds and be up 39-37 after 4. I think the only round that Crawford would take is maybe the first round. If any of the rounds is going to be kind of slow, it's going to probably be the first. So I would assume that maybe Crawford might start out with some jabs. He might start out orthodox and then switch southpaw, because he is a switch hitter, and I think he's going to primarily fight southpaw in this fight, just to give Errol Spence some problems. Obviously, Spence isn't used to fighting a lot of other southpaws in the ring, but I think Crawford will be going southpaw most of the time in this one. I mean, I could be wrong, but that's what I think. But yeah, after the first 4, I think that Errol Spence Jr. is going to be up 39-37. But then as the rounds go on, I think it's going to be really close. And like I said earlier, these two are some of the best fighters in the world. Both of them are ranked on most people's pound-for-pound lists. Both of them in the top 5, and both of these guys are definitely in the top 5 on my list as well. So I think the winner of this fight could definitely be top 2, maybe even number 1, who knows. But I think Naoya Inoue has reserved that spot with that destructive performance, but who knows. I mean, both of these guys are really good, really phenomenal in the sport of boxing. But in those middle rounds, I think that, like I said before, Errol Spence Jr. is going to have success in the early rounds, and I think that Terence Crawford will start to pick it up, and I think we'll really start to see sort of the work and the technique of both of these guys who are some of the best in the world. And I think it's really going to be a chess match in those middle rounds. I think that Spence might win one round, then Crawford might win another. Like, I really think it's going to be back and forth in those middle rounds, where I see Terence Crawford starting to find openings on Spence and start to land on those openings. And I think that, like, let's say after 6 rounds, this fight could be 58-56 in Spence's favor. Could even be 57-57. But then let's say round 7 and 8 rolls around, could be really close at around that point in the fight, like the 8th round. After 8, it could be like 77-75 for Spence. Could even be 76-76, a draw on some judges' scorecards. I really think it's going to be really close and go down to the wire. But in those middle rounds, I mean, really throughout the fight, I think that Crawford isn't going to be the one aggressing. I primarily think Spence is going to be the one aggressing on Crawford, trying to dig to the body, trying to throw nice combinations to the head. But I think that Crawford is going to be very technical in this one, really sticking out that jab out there, really fighting smart. And I think he's just not going to try and play with anything in this one. But I think that Errol Spence Jr., he's going to go in pretty fearless. I think he's just going to go in there, try and throw some nice combinations and press Terence Crawford and really try and put some pressure on him, because Terence Crawford really hasn't had any of that really tough battles in his career, aside from that fight against Sean Porter, where Porter was really trying to put that pressure on him, and Crawford was trying to counter, trying to box, and trying to fight technical. But yeah, after like the 8th round, getting back to how this fight's gonna go, in my opinion, I think it's gonna be pretty close, pretty competitive at that point. I think it's gonna be 76-76, maybe 77-75 in favor of Spence. But then the later rounds, I mean, these rounds could go either way, and they're really going to decide this fight. Both these guys have a track record of doing well in the later rounds, especially Terence Crawford, stopping Jose Benavidez in the later rounds, stopping Sean Porter in the later rounds, stopping Edgedis Kavliauskas in the later rounds. He's really done well in those later rounds, and I've seen some people online picking Terence Crawford to drop Errol Spence Jr. in the later rounds, which, I mean, who knows, it could happen, because he really goes out there in those later rounds and works really hard to land some shots and score some points and get the job done. But as for Errol Spence Jr., like I said before, he's also fought very well in the later rounds, dropped Sean Porter in the later rounds of their fight, which ultimately got him the victory, and won either all 3 or 2 of the 3 last couple rounds, and obviously scored that knockdown too. He also stopped Kell Brook in the later rounds, and that was a dog fight, and it was really, really competitive at that point, getting to the stoppage. He stopped Dennis Ugas as well in the later rounds, so I think it's going to be a really, really competitive fight as well in those late rounds. But I think like rounds 11 and 12, I think 9 and 10 are going to be pretty competitive, pretty close. And I think that maybe Errol Spence Jr. could edge them, just digging to the body late. But I just really think it's going to be really, really close. Yeah, I mean, I think this fight, it could even be a draw. It could be like a 6-6 type fight, in my opinion, but I think the judges might be swayed, obviously, in Spence's favor, because that happens. I mean, he's a PBC fighter. It's on a PBC card. I mean, that just happens in the sport of boxing. But I really think it's going to be a really close fight. It's going to go down to the wire. Spence is going to be digging to the body, really working hard in those later rounds. Crawford's going to be trying to get his shots off, trying to land his combinations. And I think that like rounds 11 and 12, Crawford's going to be going out there as well, trying to give it his all. I mean, I really think it's going to be a good fight, a really, really close fight while it lasts, especially in the later rounds. And I think that Terence Crawford, like I said before, people were picking him to score a knockdown in the later rounds, but I think that he'll be able to get some shots off on Spence, because I think just like when Spence fought Porter, he was just trying to dig in there, throw big combinations, and I think he could get caught with a good shot. But also for Terence Crawford, he could get chin checked in this fight. He could get caught with some big power, because we saw him in some trouble before, especially when he fought Edgedis Kavliauskas, where he arguably got dropped, and the referee didn't call it a knockdown. So who knows? But like I said before, going back to how I see this fight going in the later rounds, I think it's going to be back and forth, and I could see either man having success, but I think it's going to be really, really close. Most of the rounds in the later rounds could go either way, but in the end, I think the judges are going to come out with a 7-5 verdict in favor of Errol Spence Jr. I think it's probably going to be like a 115-112 Spence, a 115-113 Spence, a 115-113 Crawford, and then I think one judge will have it a little bit wider for Spence at like a 116-112, something like that. But in the end, I think that they're going to go with Errol Spence Jr. to win by split decision. So comment down below if you got this far in the video, who you think is going to win this fight. I would really appreciate it if you guys could go hit the like button, hit the subscribe button as well. So overall, I believe that Errol Spence Jr. is going to become the undisputed welterweight world champion, as I think he will defeat Terence Crawford by split decision. And yeah, that's really it. I'm MB Boxing. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys later.